Welcome to Daily Devos. My name is Raymond Gregory, and we have brand new Devos every weekday at 7 a.m. So be sure to subscribe and subscribe to notifications so you can walk this journey through the Bible with us. And we have about 800 people joining in every day, so we would love for you to be one of those people. And so I also pray for you, so if you have any prayer requests, be sure to send them to me. And the info for that is below in the comments. But today we're going to be talking about what the Bible says about singleness. That's right, we're going to be talking about singleness. You know, when I was a kid, whenever me or one of my siblings had a birthday, my grandparents would go all out and they would lavish gifts on us, and we thought it was awesome. But they felt bad about the other kid. And so I remember one time on my brother's birthday, they gave him a ton of great gifts, video games, and like silly putty things, and it was really a lavish birthday party. And they gave me my gift, and I was excited to open it, and I opened it up, and it was a calculator watch. And I was like, oh man. So I put it on, and I remember thinking, I'm going to be single the rest of my life with this calculator watch on. I thought it was horrible. I was super bummed out until it came time for math test at school. My teacher had no idea what a calculator watch was. And so I aced my math test, and it was super easy because I had a little calculator watch. And so some might call that cheating. I call it being resourceful. But then my perspective shifted. It was no longer the most lame gift in the world. It was the coolest gift and a weapon in my arsenal. It's something that brought value to my life. Well, today in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we're going to read a little bit about what the Bible has to say about singleness in a Devo I've titled Singleness is a Calculator Watch. So like I said, we'll be in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and we'll be starting in verse 6, and I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. I say this as a concession, not as a command. Okay, I want to stop for just a second, because in our last video, Paul was talking to the church there in Corinth, and in chapter 7, he's basically hosting a Q&A panel. So he's answering a bunch of questions that they have. And so they've asked questions about sexual immorality, about marriage and sexual relations, which was super awkward yesterday. And so now we're moving on to what he has to say about being single. And so we'll pick up again. I say this as a concession, not as a command. So I say what? I say all this stuff about being married, all this stuff about sexual relations and things like that. Okay, now I say this as a concession, not as a command, but I wish everyone were single just as I am. Yet each person has a special gift from God, of one kind or another. So I say to those who aren't married and to widows, it's better to stay unmarried just as I am, but if they can't control themselves, they should go ahead and marry. It's better to marry than to burn with lust. Okay. So we'll stop there. It's a short passage, but there's a lot of meat in it. And so what is Paul saying here about singleness, and what gives him the right to be the authority on it? Well, here's an interesting fact that I don't know that I really fully comprehended until I started studying for this study. And Paul, at one point in his life, it is very likely that he was married. Paul once was married, and here's how I'm going to go about in my thought process and explaining why I think that is true. So, in Jewish culture, if you weren't married by like age 20, you were considered to be sinning. Unmarried men were considered like not real men and would be excluded from heaven in that culture, in the teaching of the Jewish law in the time that Paul was alive. And Paul was likely a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin. And if you read Acts 26, there's a lot of clues as to why I would believe that. But in Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 through 6, Paul says this, and listen in really carefully. Though I could have confidence in my own effort, if anyone could, indeed, if others have reason for confidence in their own efforts, I have even more. I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I am pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demand the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church. And as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. Okay, so if Paul's saying he obeyed the law without fault, he was a true Jew, and the strictest sense of the obedience to the Jewish law, he definitely would have been married. And so now we see he's single. So we don't know what happened to his wife. Either she died, or maybe she left him because he became a Christian. We don't know, but we can know for sure that he is single, as he says in the scriptures here. And so because he's seen both sides of the coin and he's experienced both worlds, he can speak very authoritatively on this. And so having witnessed both sides, Paul gives us just two insights about singleness, and I think they're very, very powerful. And the first one is this: singleness is not a command, but it's a calling. Singleness is not a command, but it's a calling. In verse 6, I say this as a concession, not as a command. It's a calling. So a lot of you might be thinking, well, I hope God hasn't called me to be single. I hope maybe he's just taking his time bringing me the right person. Well, think about all the people in the Bible who made a huge impact and beyond in Christianity and in history of the church that were single. We have Mary Magdalene, who was one of the few at the foot of the cross and the first at the tomb, and to see Jesus risen from the dead. She was single. We have John the Baptist, who paved the way for the Messiah, the disciple Jesus loved. I mean, that's pretty incredible. John was single. Jesus, in the physical sense, was single. He didn't have a wife. And now he is married. He is the bride. We are the bride of Christ, so he's married to the church in the spiritual sense, but Jesus was single. And we all know he did some pretty cool things. Paul, as he stated here, is now single. He wrote 13 of the New Testament books and was a great apostle. And so, I mean, you can't say that his singleness kept him from great things. And then we jump ahead in history. Augustine, St. Augustine of Hippo, one of the greatest theologians of all time that brought the West and the Western understanding of Christianity to the forefront, was a celibate. So, to say that singleness is any small calling would be just flying in the face of all these examples. And so, if you're single, or you feel that you're called to be single, or you don't know that you're called to be single, maybe ask yourself, Lord, what do you have for me in my life to serve you? What big thing do you want me to accomplish for your kingdom that I can do more effectively if I'm single? And so I think that's what Paul is saying here. Singleness is not a command. It is a calling, and not to be taken lightly. Second and final thing that Paul is highlighting here is this: singleness is not synonymous with loneliness. Singleness is not synonymous with loneliness. So I have had about 1,000,001 foot and mouth situations. Sometimes the jokes just flow out and I don't have a chance. I don't know if you've ever seen Brian Regan do his bit where he's like, sometimes you just talk and you're like, no, you try to put it back in. It's too late. You can't do it. I've had tons of those moments. One of those moments was just a little while after I was married, probably about a year or two. And I was leading worship for a singles group at my church. And it was in this giant sanctuary, but there was only about 150, 200 people in the sanctuary. And so the pastor came out and he said, hey, could you get them to kind of scrunch together so it doesn't seem so spread out? And I said, yeah, no problem. And so I got out there right before I lead worship, mind you, and I said, hey guys, could you maybe sit more closer together? Just because you're single doesn't mean you have to sit alone. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, no! And they didn't respond to worship that well that night. If looks could kill, I would have died about 153 times. And so, but, all that to say, in verse 7, he says, "But I wish everyone were single, just as I am. Yet each person has a special gift from God of one kind or another. So I say to those who aren't married and to widows, it is better to stay unmarried just as I am." Listen, man, singleness is a gift. If it's your calling, it is a gift. Just in the same way that I got that calculator watch, and I was so bummed at that calculator watch until I took my math test. Then I finally saw it as a valuable gift. And so sometimes you might be thinking, man, I'm single. I wish I were married. Or, God, why have you called me to be single? One day you're going to realize the potential of that gift. And sometimes the grass looks greener on the other side. You ever heard that term? I mean, it's such a popular term. Yeah, the grass maybe looks greener on the other side, but when you get there, you still have to mow it. You still have to take care of it. You still have to water it. And so it's going to be hard work either way. But just because you're single doesn't mean you have to be lonely. I mean, Paul was abandoned and shipwrecked and beaten and put in prison. And I don't know that he ever felt truly alone, because he had Christ and he had a mission and a calling that God had put on his life. And singleness was a big part of that calling. And so, again, singleness is a calculator watch from God. It might not look so stylish right now, but you'll be so glad that you have it when it comes time for math class. So that is what I have for you today. Just to recap, singleness is not a command, it is a calling, and it is a high calling. Number 2, singleness is not synonymous with loneliness. It is a gift, and you'll be glad that you have that gift when the time comes for you to fulfill your calling. So I love you guys. Be sure to like and comment. Maybe if you have some questions, make sure to subscribe, and so you can get more of these videos. And maybe let me know, if you are single, what the Lord has done in your life through being a single person. And then maybe if you're married, let me know what the Lord has done in your life as well. And so tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about divorce. So we talked about marriage, we talked about intimacy, we talked about singleness. Now we're going to tackle divorce in this Q&A session from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Again, I love you guys. Make sure you send me prayer requests. My email is right down there. And I will see you guys tomorrow